Steve Coleman is Executive Director and President of what he describes as a small grassroots charity, but I will say that it's a grassroots charity with a very big personality in one of the world's iconic cities. It's called Washington Parks and People, and it started 20 years ago in response to a crisis meeting, I gather, at Steve's house, in response to a crisis in that community. And it's become something bigger than you can imagine. Steve is now a leader in the urban parks movement in Washington DC, but also across Australia. He's revitalising with his colleagues, with unexpected colleagues too, I think you'll hear, revitalising, restoring and maintaining parks through unique partnerships and with some extraordinary results. Let's give him a warm welcome to Melbourne.
Thank you very much. It's really a humbling honor to be here in this magnificent space and following a real hero of mine and preceding another hero of mine. I'm very grateful to be here. Interesting, your comments about the spectrum of parks. You know, I'm reminded of the American naturalist John Muir, who spoke of that continuum when he said that garden and park making goes on everywhere, whether it's a small flower box in a city tenement or a grand natural park like Yosemite. And that continuum, I think, is something that we've often lost sight of as we become increasingly disconnected and illiterate about green space right in our midst in the cities where most of us now live. I'm here with deep gratitude and humility because of teachers, of those whose shoulders I stand on. And I'm here first and foremost because of a boy I never met, who, Natasha alluded to it. He was playing in the street next to my home on Martin Luther King's birthday 20 years ago, at the time that Washington was the most murderous city in all of the U.S., which is saying a lot, I'm afraid. And he was gunned down. It was a school holiday. It was noon. There were children out in the street, and he fell in the tree box next to my home. My housemaid, who was an emergency room physician, ran out to try to save his life. And Ricky Magnus died in her arms. And the police, in response to this latest horrific killing, yet another young black boy in our neighborhood, in our city, told us to go inside, lock our doors, don't talk to strangers, don't go out at night, and whatever we do, don't go in the park down the street. And I called a meeting in my home. I was the head of our little neighborhood association the following evening, inviting people who thought perhaps there might be another way to come together. And 55 people packed into my house wanting to do something different than locking the door and giving up. And somebody mentioned a group of African-American grandparents who had started a little nonviolent community crime patrol with no weapons other than their love for their community and a commitment to saying hello to each other. And they had worked miracles on corner after corner of a neighborhood far more riddled with violence than my own. And so we decided to follow their lead, and we called them up the next day, and they explained you have to get this silly orange hat and put the name of your neighborhood on the orange hat and go out and say hi to people. And so that's what we did. We got a CB radio. If you ever need a radio, don't go to Radio Shack. I don't know if you have that, but it lost its signal the moment we got near the park. And so we really had nothing left to protect ourselves but each other and our commitment to our community and these silly rules. We had to be multiracial, couldn't carry a weapon, we had to say hello. We walked into the park, preparing to be pounced on or something. People said we were crazy. It was seen as the center of violence in our community. We walked in, held our breaths, looked around. The place was empty as far as the eye could see. It was so dangerous that it was safe. There was no one there to mug, so there were no muggers. And then we started steeling ourselves up and walking and noticing things, noticing that amid the graffiti and the broken glass and the lights that were out, there was a serenity and a power to the place. We didn't know it had been a Native American spiritual ground, that it had been the place that Thomas Jefferson wanted in a very American-centric way to make the center of the world. But there was something that was quite powerful about it. And just as we were getting comfortable, we realized we weren't alone after all. Up ahead, we saw two shadowy figures lurking, as shadowy figures do. And we remembered this rule that now seemed rather stupid, and fortunately the lights were low enough people couldn't see that I was anything but fearless, but we'd gotten that far, and so we sort of inched up to the first shadowy figure and held out a hand and said, "Hi, we're here with the neighborhood patrol, we're trying to make the neighborhood a little safer, and we're ready to run with the other half of ourselves." There was a pause, kind of a bemused pause as I think of it now, and the hand extended and said, "I'm Reverend Morris Samuel. Welcome to Meridian Hill." Reverend Samuel had been coming to that park for 36 years. Nearly every day the weather was fair. He was there watching the ducks come and try to nest. He was there the night that Dr. King was killed and watched the fires consume parts of our city below. Even amid the horror of that time, there was peace there in that small patch of nature in the densest, most diverse part of the capital. The second shadowy figure was a little more complicated. He had my last name, but nothing in common with me. Howard Coleman had been a drug addict and a dealer. He'd been locked up. He couldn't read or write. But when he talked about the park that night and ensuing nights, we saw that he had tears in his eyes. He said, "This used to be the most beautiful place in the world. Now look at it." That simple act of saying hello that night has led me on a journey these past 20 years that's taken me around the world and kept me busy working in my own neighborhood still to try to use green space to counter violence, advance health, and help us realize some of our most deeply held dreams of what life is really meant to be and what our cities and civilization itself can be. And along the way, I've met some remarkable teachers who continue to teach me to this day. I met a group of kids from homeless families, transitional housing, who had never seen real soil in their lives. All they knew was dirt compacted with broken glass and concrete that had nothing alive in it and had never seen any life. And so when we took them into the park to plant flowers, we weren't prepared for what happened as they dug into the soil and suddenly, shockingly discovered these squiggly little things living beneath the soil. And they wanted to take the earthworms home as pets. And my colleague, my late mentor, Josephine Butler, daughter of sharecroppers, granddaughter of slaves, said, "Oh no, you've got to leave them here because they are making the soil for the trees so the trees can make the air for you to breathe." And the kids were like, "Oh." And they carefully put the earthworms aside, planted the flowers, and put them back in their home. In that moment, there was the magic of nature, of reverence for life, that too many of our kids who are killing each other, even now as I speak, have never had a chance to experience. And so I've learned from them. I learned from a boy in a far more abandoned part of town, in a park that has now come back to life called Marvin Gaye Park, who introduced himself to me as Nature Boy. And Nature Boy led me through that park and its wonders that had been forgotten for generations, since the time generations ago when people were actually baptized in that stream, some of the senior citizens who live in that neighborhood. I've known a 5-year-old girl who was so thrilled to walk her park for the first time in her life. She clutched the little watercolor map that we and folks in the community had made to show that there was something good in that place. She clutched it upside down, leading us for blocks and blocks through this magic land that had been unknown to her, along with other kids for whom parks had just been a concept, something they saw in movies, and yet they had rallied their friends to get over 2,000 petition signatures to not only demand help from the city, but to commit leadership by themselves. Kids who went so far as to think of an idea to take the little garden where they were growing vegetables that they were not allowed to distribute to the community, and to go to the city government and say, "You know, they're selling heroin in the park. How come we can't sell our vegetables?" And so I've had the privilege of being a little spark plug and working with people like this, and we actually helped them replace the heroin market with a kids' farm market that has now been running for 8 years. Of all the things I've done in my professional life, I'm more proud of that one little thing I helped them do than anything. I met amazing people, Josephine Butler I mentioned, who really taught me the deeper story of the land. I mean, in many ways, the work I'm doing today is very much like work I started doing when I was 9 years old as a Chief Ranger Rick in the National Wildlife Federation, working with people to reclaim a forgotten stream valley dump into a park. I met a guy who was literally a one-man band who came down to celebrate what we were doing in the park that would become Marvin Gaye Park by bringing his keyboard and taking Marvin Gaye's lyrics in the park where Marvin first really performed his own music, and adapting the lyrics to tell the story of that special park and what we were doing for it. I've met a woman named Rebecca Stamps who Marty has met several of these heroes of mine in Washington, who formed an organization in the wake of some of the most horrific violence in our city called Project Blessings for Hurting Parents, that has found new ways of using nature in this long-forgotten ribbon of green below her public housing project to rally people and inspire them about what's possible in their lives. I've known a person on my own staff, Kenny Barber, who came out of prison and seemingly a life that had no hope, and found new possibilities for moving his life forward and helping now to train thousands of other volunteers and hundreds of job trainees in the possibilities of green space as a gateway to the green economy and green jobs. And I've been inspired really by my own son, who's seeking to follow in my footsteps at the age of 4, wanting to grab every kind of tool imaginable to get into the dirt and do this work. This is magic that we're all engaged in. The power of the land to bring out the child within all of us. I'm pleased that Richard Louv is now turning his attention to adults, because we're all really kids who are disconnected with nature and who are seeking to return to the power of nature that we knew as kids. I've seen the power of learning that's grounded in the outdoors. What a transformation. In some of the neighborhoods we work in, you couldn't even see outside the classroom. Folks were learning about African American history from posters when they could walk out the door to the very spot where Dr. King stood when he galvanized people for Freedom Summer out in the park. I've seen people transform an entire park into a stage and everyone in it into the dance company. Seen people of all shapes and sizes and ages and colors hold hands and form a dance around the center of what had been the most violent national park in the entire capital region. I've seen people transform vacant lots into sacred art spaces, making sacred trees of life in the middle of them, and in so doing, transforming the communities around them. I've seen people use parks to tell their stories and their ancestors' stories in new ways, of parks being a place for celebrating all the different ethnicities that come together in our cities in so many ways. I've seen parks really advance our safety, our health, jobs, civic pride and engagement. Really, it goes so far beyond simply revitalizing the environment, which is at the core of this, obviously. But really, what parks and nature in our cities offer is a way for us to tackle the most pressing issues of our time. And I challenge you, from the climate crisis to poverty, to find a single issue where parks and nature are not the key that we've been missing. In fact, for too long, we've had policy grounded in everything but the ground, disconnected from the places, the nature, the natural assets that make life worth living. And we've found time after time, on issue after issue, when we use parks and we use nature, we find a better, stronger, more sustainable, more cost-effective way in every sense of getting the job done. Isn't it far better from a health standpoint for us to invest in that ounce of prevention of getting people out into nature and being able to counter the type 2 diabetes and hypertension that our kids have, to counter addiction through the wonderful natural boost to mental health that comes from being out in nature? And one can do this same kind of analysis right down through. Are police and prisons really the best way to make safe cities when we've disconnected from the green spaces that really are the heart of true, not virtual, but real community? This is our challenge. This is our charge. This is our opportunity right now on this earth. You here in Melbourne have an opportunity to help lead the way. And I thank you for this chance to share with you at this moment.
Associate Professor Marty Townsend is a local. She's Associate Dean in the School of Health and Social Development at Deakin University. She's a local, but she's a world leader in research investigating that relationship between nature and health and well-being, especially mental health. And I urge you to get hold of her report that she was involved in with another called Feel Blue, Touch Green. Let's give Marty a warm welcome.
Thanks, Natasha. It's great to be here, and thank you for all coming. The question is, do healthy parks equal healthy people? Well, from my perspective, the answer is clearly yes. Back in 2000, my team at Deakin University began researching the human health benefits of contact with nature. In our review of the evidence, which we updated in 2008, and I have half a dozen copies here for those who would like it, and in subsequent research, we found some amazing facts. Here are some of them. As well as the obvious ecosystem services provided by parks, nature and the outdoor life make an important contribution to physical health by encouraging and enabling physical activity. Nature and the outdoor life make an important contribution to social well-being by encouraging social interaction. How many of you live in the Melbourne suburban area? Okay. And you walk down your local street, and as you're walking through Bentley or Camberwell or wherever it is, you walk down the street and you say, "Good afternoon, hello, how are you?" Is that right? A few nods. My suggestion is that if you do that, you're probably likely to end up very quickly in Monash Medical Centre Psych Unit or the Alfred Psych Unit, because somebody will call an ambulance and say, "This person's off their tree." They're talking to everybody in the street. But if you walk in your local park and say, "Hello, how are you?" they'll stop and talk to you. And if you're walking your dog through the park, they'll stop even more readily and talk to you. Nature facilitates social interaction, and we shouldn't underestimate the importance of that. We know that social connectedness is significantly associated with better health. If you have low social connectedness, you are 3.22 times more likely to die of stroke. That's a very significant figure. So, nature helps our social connections. Nature and the outdoor life also make an important contribution to mental health and well-being. Yesterday at the Congress, Jeff Kennett launched this executive summary of a new study that we have done. The full report will be available in June. Entitled Beyond Blue to Green, The Benefits of Contact with Nature for Mental Health and Wellbeing. It's a significant study. It's another review of the evidence, but this one focuses specifically on the benefits of contact with nature for mental health and wellbeing. Let me just give you a couple of the facts from that review. A study from the Netherlands in 2009 found that people living within 1 kilometre of green spaces had a lower prevalence for a range of diseases, and especially for anxiety and depression. Access to green spaces is important for our health and well-being. Conversely, a Swiss study showed that young children who were deprived of independent outdoor play, just what Kathy was talking about before, because of traffic or other concerns, displayed poorer social and motor skills. We really hamper our children's development if we don't encourage them to get out there into green spaces. In 2005-06, my team undertook a project called Feel Blue, Touch Green. It was the forerunner to the projects that the People and Parks Foundation has labelled broadly Feel Blue, Touch Green, and there are a number of those. It was an intervention in which we took people who were suffering from depression and anxiety out into the Anglesea Heath and connected them with a local friends group and engaged them in hands-on nature-based activities. Before each activity, we assessed their mood using a standardised scale. And after the activity, we retested their mood. And in every instance, their mood had improved because of the duration or associated with the duration of the activity. It was a wonderful project, and people talked about how it really changed their lives, how it made them feel good about themselves, that they could actually do something. They made friends. There were two gentlemen who were part of the group who had been at loggerheads before, but by the time the project finished, they were off at the pub drinking together. Now, I'm not sure that's a recommendation, but, you know, it was a good social connection. One of the people who was involved in that project was a woman who had suffered some seizures, nothing to do with her anxiety or depression, but who was unable to complete the project because of the physical health disabilities she was suffering. She loved the project so much, though, that before it ended, she wrote us a letter. And I want to end this brief introduction by reading you that letter, because I think it says a lot about how contact with nature improves our health and well-being. She addressed this to my colleague Matt Ebden, who was the project officer. Dear Matt, I thought I would write to thank you for giving me the opportunity to participate in this project. Whilst I realise my time spent in the project was probably not long enough for you to use the data, I thought I would give you some feedback of my experience. The concept was really great, and whilst I knew very little of my surroundings, and at times I felt really out of place with those around me because they appeared very knowledgeable, I actually found that time went by very quickly once you were given a task. You didn't seem to have time to worry about anything else that may have been happening in your life, and at the end of each session I felt more relaxed, had acquired a little more knowledge, and felt positive that things are achievable. The only reason I didn't continue to participate was because of not being able to drive for 6 months due to my unexpected seizure in June and another one in July, and the fact that I was also going on holiday with my husband, who had some time off for long service leave. I appreciated your offer of trying to arrange transport for me, but this only highlighted the fact even more that I was reliant on other people for something that I've been doing for so long. My husband and I actually participated in a walk at Aireys Inlet, and it was a really lovely day, and I found that the knowledge of the group was outstanding. I would never have noticed half of the things that they showed us had we been on our own. My husband found it interesting as he's a lab technician at school and he's often dealing with plants and their life cycles. A benefit that has come out of this program for me is that I'm now looking into volunteering at the Botanic Gardens, and I've discovered a love of taking photos with a digital camera, trying to capture some real nature shots. I've enclosed some photos for you to keep that were taken on our walk. I've reluctantly sent the one of me posing just to prove that I did have a good time. The others are either macro or scenic shots. These photos I've had enlarged, except the one of me, and framed them, and they look great. I hope that I keep this interest up because I am now taking more notice of my surroundings and looking for that special shot. Another benefit was that I spent a few days in the Grampians just recently and found that I was actually looking where I was walking and could identify some of the vegetation. My husband was suitably impressed that I could discuss with him some of the plant life, and we took some really lovely photos of the new life that is establishing itself after the devastation of the bushfires in January. I hope to enlarge some of these to add to my collection. While none of this will assist your research program, I just felt I should let you know some benefit has been gained, and I thank you for opening my eyes to another aspect in my life that I may wish to explore. I hope the project was successful for you and your group. Best wishes. Thank you.